Welcome. Our story today is titled The Mountain Secret, a time-traveling adventure. It is one of the fantasy stories. Close your eyes and listen. Once upon a time in a land far, far away, the village of Edelweiss, nestled in the embrace of the Alpine foothills, a mere stone's throw from the majestic Mont Blanc. On nights when the moon hung full and luminous, the mountain's shadow stretched like a colossal wing, sheltering the villagers from the night's mysteries. But on the darkest nights, another shadow haunted their hearts, one far deeper and more chilling, linked to a faint light that flickered distantly in the snowy dunes bordering the ancient course of the Rhone River, a river that had shifted its path over millennia. In that era, the Rhone was mightier and more profound than it is now, its waters often turbulent with fierce seasonal floods that swept over the banks, sometimes even altering the river's course. Traveling ships faced peril during these floods, and some met tragic fates, sinking into its raging depths. Ethan, a young man in his late 20s, possessed an insatiable curiosity and a restless spirit, traits that didn't endear him to the conservative villagers. He saw their quiet acceptance of superstitions as a suffocating constraint, while his own gaze constantly yearned to explore beyond the endless snowy horizon. He worked as a carpenter, inheriting the trade from his father, his hands strong and capable of shaping rigid wood into works of art, but his mind often wandered, dreaming of worlds he had never seen. The tale of the faint light was an ingrained part of the village's evening lore, recounted by grandmothers to children to instill fear and keep them indoors after sunset. They said it was no ordinary light, but the specter of a sunken galleon, its curse clinging to the village for ages. Generations ago, on a night of a storm unlike any they had ever witnessed, a large ship had shattered against the coastal rocks, carrying precious cargo and travelers from distant lands. Instead of rushing to their aid, the villagers were enticed by the glimmer of gold and jewels the ship might hold. They waited until morning to collect the spoils. But dawn revealed a horrifying scene of frozen corpses and dreams turned to ash. It was said that a curse befell the village from that day forward, and that the light that appeared was the spirit of the ship and its lost passengers, seeking justice and revenge. Terrifying tales circulated about this light. Some claimed to have seen pale phantoms dancing around it, moaning and whispering names no one recognized. Others recounted hearing the sounds of crashing waves and a raging storm coming from the light's direction on calm nights. Most frightening of all was the belief that the light attracted evil spirits from the underworld, especially as local legend connected that area to a secret passage leading to other realms beneath the earth, under the protection of Mont Blanc's towering presence. It was whispered that this passage was a gateway to the kingdom of the dead, and that the light was a sign foretelling the opening of this gateway and the emergence of dark creatures into the world of the living. Ethan grew up hearing these stories, but instead of planting fear in his heart, they ignited a spark of curiosity. He felt there was a deeper secret behind this light, a secret that might hold the key to understanding something larger than their mundane daily lives in the village. He would watch the light from the window of his small room on clear nights, its faint glow visible in the distance, as if beckoning him to uncover its truth. One night, as the full moon bathed the snowy landscape in its silvery light, Ethan felt a powerful urge compelling him to move. Fear still lingered, whispering tales of horror in his ears. but a stronger desire took hold, a thirst for knowledge, for adventure, for breaking free from the chains of superstition. He prepared a meager meal, took his walking stick, and with steady steps, headed towards the door. He glanced back at the quiet village, sleeping under the majestic shadow of Mont Blanc, then turned and set off towards the snowy dunes, towards that mysterious light awaiting him in the heart of the darkness. This was the beginning, the start of a journey that would take him far beyond the limited world of Edelweiss, to realms he could never have imagined. The snow crunched coldly beneath Ethan's boots, each step drawing him closer to the enigmatic light and quickening the rhythm of his heart. The darkness was not absolute, for the pale moonlight offered enough illumination to discern the snowy terrain ahead, but it was a desolate darkness, filled with soft whispers carried on the wind, which at times sounded to him like faint moans or distant calls. He glanced back occasionally, watching the silhouette of Mont Blanc recede in the distance, yet it remained a towering and majestic presence, a silent witness to his journey. As Ethan drew nearer to his destination, the faint light began to intensify, yet it retained an unusual aura, as if it were not a glow produced by fire or a lamp, but rather an emanation from within, pulsing slowly like a hidden heart. Strange formations began to appear around him, peculiar rocks scattered here and there, some appearing as though sculpted by the relentless passage of time and the wind, while others possessed sharp, unnatural angles, as if remnants of an ancient structure buried beneath the snow. When he was within a few hundred meters of the light, Ethan felt a distinct change in the air, a colder, more humid quality, carrying an unfamiliar scent, a mixture of salt and minerals and something else, something ancient and timeless. Hazy shapes began to materialize on the distant horizon, as if the snow itself was forming and shifting in an irregular manner. The fear he had been trying to suppress began to creep back into his heart, but his curiosity held a stronger grip. Ethan paused behind a large boulder, attempting to conceal himself from any unseen eyes that might be watching. He peered intently towards the source of the light. It was situated in a hollow between two large snowdrifts, as if the ground had cleaved open there. The light emanating from it was not a harsh, blinding glare, but a soft, ethereal blue, casting an eerie glow upon the surrounding area. He saw no phantoms or terrifying creatures as the legends had foretold, but there was something else, something far stranger. The ground around the light appeared different, as if shimmering faintly, or perhaps it was merely a reflection of the light itself on the snowflakes. But as he focused his gaze, Ethan noticed that this shimmer was not natural. It resembled a subtle ripple in the air, or perhaps something deeper, a tremor in the fabric of existence itself. Suddenly, Ethan heard a faint sound, not a scream or a moan, but more like a distant whisper, as if the wind was carrying incomprehensible words. This whisper gradually grew louder, and Ethan began to feel a slight dizziness. The words remained unclear, yet they resonated with a strange familiarity from somewhere deep within his memory. The blue light began to shift, growing brighter and more intense, and strange shapes started to form in the air around it. Before him, Ethan saw what resembled a gateway, a vortex of blue light interlaced with other colors he had never witnessed before. He felt an inexplicable force pulling him towards this portal, an irresistible power, as if his destiny awaited him there. Ethan recalled the words of the song he had once heard, "Through the doorway to another world." Could this be the other world the song spoke of? Were the legends he had heard about a secret passage beneath Mont Blanc connected to this light? He had no answers, but he felt compelled to experience it. Fear still lingered, but the courage that his curiosity had awakened held a stronger sway. Ethan took a deep breath, gripped his walking stick firmly, and began to walk towards the glowing light. Each step brought him closer to the unknown, to a realm that might be filled with horrors as the legends warned, or might hold wonders he had never imagined. As he reached the edge of the luminous vortex, he paused for a moment, glancing back one last time towards the direction of his distant village. Then, with a resolute step, he strode into the shimmering blue light, vanishing in the blink of an eye, leaving behind the silent, snowy wilderness and a secret waiting to be unveiled in other realms. The moment Ethan stepped into the blue light felt like being submerged in an ocean of viscous, warm liquid, followed by a sudden shift into a cold, boundless void. He no longer felt his physical body as he knew it, but rather became a pure consciousness drifting through a vast cosmos filled with colors and shapes that defied human comprehension. Streaks of light danced around him, forming and dissolving, and incomprehensible sounds echoed through the emptiness, like the remnants of conversations from distant times and places. Suddenly, these colors and shapes began to coalesce, taking on more distinct forms. Ethan felt a jarring transition, as if an unseen force was pulling him through a long, luminous tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, a clear image materialized before him, a vibrant, living scene. He found himself standing in a bustling marketplace teeming with vendors and shoppers. The clothing worn by the people was strange, made of rich fabrics and adorned with intricate patterns unlike anything he had ever seen in his village. The language spoken was also different, its melody musical and foreign to his ears. The buildings surrounding him were colossal, constructed from a pristine white stone, decorated with statues and murals depicting winged creatures and flying contraptions. He looked up and saw strange objects moving in the sky, neither birds nor clouds, but gleaming metallic bodies soaring at incredible speeds. Ethan realized he was no longer in his own time or place. He had crossed into another world, an advanced civilization that might have flourished millennia ago, or perhaps in a distant future. His stay in this place was fleeting. Abruptly, the image began to fade, replaced by a thick fog. Ethan felt a violent dizziness, and then he found himself in another location. This time, he stood in a dense forest, the trees towering giants with leaves as broad as natural canopies. The light was dim, barely penetrating the thick foliage. He heard strange animal sounds unlike any he had ever heard before, ranging from eerie whispers to loud roars. The air here was humid and warm, thick with the scent of climbing vines and exotic blossoms. He saw small, brightly colored creatures flitting between the trees and enormous furry animals moving in the shadows. Ethan felt a mixture of fear and wonder. This was a vibrant and rich world, but also a dangerous and unfamiliar one. Once again, his stay was brief. The forest began to dissolve, morphing into another scene. This time, Ethan found himself standing on the shore of a vast ocean. The sky was a clear blue, and the sun shone brightly. He saw massive ships with white sails filling the horizon, appearing like giant birds gliding on the water. The people here wore simple clothing, but their faces were tanned and their eyes sparkled. They spoke another different language, but this time, Ethan felt it was closer to his own, as if he could hear echoes of familiar words. He saw fishermen returning from the sea with nets overflowing with fish, children playing on the sand, and women washing clothes in the ocean's waters. For a moment, Ethan felt a sense of peace and tranquility in this sun-drenched place. But this feeling quickly dissipated. The sky began to darken with clouds, a strong wind arose, and the waves started to crash violently. He saw the ship struggling to withstand the storm, some beginning to list and sink. Ethan felt a sense of helplessness as he watched this scene unfold, unable to do anything to aid these people. Then, the image began to fade once more, and the spinning sensation returned. He felt as if unseen forces were toying with him, transporting him from place to place, from time to time, without any control over the matter. Throughout these fleeting journeys, Ethan caught glimpses of other worlds, some that appeared beautiful and prosperous, and others that seemed bleak and desolate. He saw towering cities that reached towards the heavens, ancient civilizations that had vanished, and fierce battles between massive armies. Each scene left a deep impression on his mind, amplifying his wonder and broadening his horizons. He began to understand that the light he had stepped into was not merely the ghost of a sunken ship, but a gateway to the corridors of time and dimension, a true secret passage connecting countless realms. But amidst these wonders, the longing for his village grew stronger in his heart. He yearned to see the majestic Mont Blanc once more, to hear the dialect of his villagers, to smell the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from their ovens. He did not know how to return, or even if it was possible, but he was determined to try. Amidst this cosmic whirlwind, memories of his village began to fade, becoming like faint images in an old, forgotten album. Yet, in the depths of his consciousness, a slender thread still tethered him to his past, the memory of the sun's warmth on his face as he carved a piece of wood, and the distant echo of the church bells tolling in Edelweiss. This thread was what fueled his hope and determination to return. In one fleeting moment, Ethan found himself in another peculiar location. The sky here was a deep violet, and the ground was carpeted with bioluminescent flora that pulsed with light in the darkness. Strange creatures moved around him, some resembling giant insects, others a bizarre amalgamation of reptiles and birds. These beings communicated through strange clicking sounds and flashes of colored light. Ethan felt a profound sense of unease in this alien world, trying to remain unseen by these creatures. He observed them from a distance, attempting to decipher the nature of this place, but he could not connect it to anything he had ever known. In another instant, he stood in a city constructed of glass and crystal. The buildings were transparent, revealing intricate mechanisms operating within. Small flying vehicles zipped through the air with effortless grace, and there were no signs of pedestrians. Ethan felt a profound sense of isolation in this cold, advanced place, as if he belonged to another era, a primitive time compared to this overwhelming technological progress. Throughout these experiences, Ethan began to notice a peculiar phenomenon. In every world or time he passed through, there were faint echoes that reminded him of his village. Sometimes, he would hear a simple melody resembling a folk tune he had heard in his childhood, and at other times, he would see a familiar symbol, an inscription on a wall, or a design in a piece of jewelry. These echoes began to guide him indirectly, like invisible threads pulling him in a certain direction. On one occasion, Ethan found himself in a vast underground chamber, The walls were covered in familiar runes, and he saw colossal statues of ancient figures. The lighting was dim, provided by flickering torches mounted on the walls. Ethan felt that this place was closer to his own world, as if his journey was leading him back towards a point in the past or the near future. While examining the runes on the walls, he heard a faint voice calling his name. The voice was familiar, yet he could not recall it clearly. Ethan followed the sound hesitantly, arriving at a narrow passage that led to another room. In the center of the room, he saw a figure seated on the ground, an old man with a long white beard and piercing eyes that looked at him intently. He wore simple white robes and appeared to be awaiting Ethan's arrival. The old man spoke in a calm, deep voice, in a language that felt strangely familiar to Ethan. "Welcome, Ethan," he said. "Your arrival has been long awaited." Ethan was taken aback. How did this old man know his name? And who was he? Ethan asked him about his location and the reason for his presence there. "This is a place between worlds," the old man replied, "where time and dimension converge. You have come here through the gateway you opened, a gateway located beneath the shadow of Mont Blanc. It has been open for a time, but it is now beginning to close." The old man continued, "You have witnessed many wonders and traveled through countless realms. You have learned much, but most importantly, you have not lost hope of returning to your home. This persistence is the key to your return." Ethan asked the old man how he could find his way back. The old man pointed to a symbol drawn on the ground, a circle with an eye in its center. "Focus your gaze upon this symbol," he instructed, "and remember all that you have experienced and all that you long for in your own world. The gateway will open your path home." Ethan looked at the symbol, and memories of his village flooded his mind. His mother's face, his father's laughter, the crisp mountain air. He felt a strong, compelling force pulling him forward. He looked up to thank the old man, but he had vanished. The symbol on the ground began to glow with a powerful light, and Ethan felt a violent dizziness once more. He knew his journey was not yet over, but he now felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief that his return was becoming possible. The echoes he had heard throughout his journey were signs pointing towards this encounter, and this mysterious old man had been a guide leading him back on the right path. But to what time would he return? And would he find his village as he had left it? These questions echoed in his mind as he was once again engulfed by the vortex of dimensions. Amidst this cosmic whirlwind, memories of his village began to fade, becoming like faint images in an old, forgotten album. Yet, in the depths of his consciousness, a slender thread still tethered him to his past. The memory of the sun's warmth on his face as he carved a piece of wood, and the distant echo of the church bells tolling in Edelweiss. This thread was what fueled his hope and determination to return. In one fleeting moment, Ethan found himself in another peculiar location. The sky here was a deep violet, and the ground was carpeted with bioluminescent flora that pulsed with light in the darkness. Strange creatures moved around him, some resembling giant insects, others a bizarre amalgamation of reptiles and birds. These beings communicated through strange clicking sounds and flashes of colored light. Ethan felt a profound sense of unease in this alien world, trying to remain unseen by these creatures. He observed them from a distance, attempting to decipher the nature of this place, but he could not connect it to anything he had ever known. In another instant, he stood in a city constructed of glass and crystal. The buildings were transparent, revealing intricate mechanisms operating within. Small flying vehicles zipped through the air with effortless grace, and there were no signs of pedestrians. Ethan felt a profound sense of isolation in this cold, advanced place, as if he belonged to another era, a primitive time compared to this overwhelming technological progress. Throughout these experiences, Ethan began to notice a peculiar phenomenon. In every world or time he passed through, there were faint echoes that reminded him of his village. Sometimes, he would hear a simple melody resembling a folk tune he had heard in his childhood, and at other times, he would see a familiar symbol, an inscription on a wall, or a design in a piece of jewelry. These echoes began to guide him indirectly, like invisible threads pulling him in a certain direction. On one occasion, Ethan found himself in a vast underground chamber. The walls were covered in familiar runes, and he saw colossal statues of ancient figures. The lighting was dim, provided by flickering torches mounted on the walls. Ethan felt that this place was closer to his own world, as if his journey was leading him back towards a point in the past or the near future. While examining the runes on the walls, he heard a faint voice calling his name. The voice was familiar, yet he could not recall it clearly. Ethan followed the sound hesitantly, arriving at a narrow passage that led to another room. In the center of the room, he saw a figure seated on the ground, an old man with a long white beard and piercing eyes that looked at him intently. He wore simple white robes and appeared to be awaiting Ethan's arrival. The old man spoke in a calm, deep voice, in a language that felt strangely familiar to Ethan. "Welcome, Ethan," he said. "Your arrival has been long awaited." Ethan was taken aback. How did this old man know his name? And who was he? Ethan asked him about his location and the reason for his presence there. "This is a place between worlds," the old man replied, "where time and dimension converge. You have come here through the gateway you opened, a gateway located beneath the shadow of Mont Blanc. It has been open for a time, but it is now beginning to close." The old man continued, "You have witnessed many wonders and traveled through countless realms. You have learned much, but most importantly, you have not lost hope of returning to your home. This persistence is the key to your return." Ethan asked the old man how he could find his way back. The old man pointed to a symbol drawn on the ground, a circle with an eye in its center. "Focus your gaze upon this symbol," he instructed, "and remember all that you have experienced and all that you long for in your own world. The gateway will open your path home." Ethan looked at the symbol, and memories of his village flooded his mind. His mother's face, his father's laughter, the crisp mountain air. He felt a strong, compelling force pulling him forward. He looked up to thank the old man, but he had vanished. The symbol on the ground began to glow with a powerful light, and Ethan felt a violent dizziness once more. He knew his journey was not yet over, but he now felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief that his return was becoming possible. The echoes he had heard throughout his journey were signs pointing towards this encounter, and this mysterious old man had been a guide leading him back on the right path. But to what time would he return? And would he find his village as he had left it? These questions echoed in his mind as he was once again engulfed by the vortex of dimensions. The vortex of light that engulfed Ethan this time was different. It lacked the initial calmness and order, instead resembling a raging cosmic storm, tugging and tearing at him in myriad directions. He felt his very being stretch and contract, as if time itself had lost all meaning. Fleeting glimpses of worlds unlike any he had seen before flashed before his eyes, like fleeting images in a troubled dream. He witnessed luminous creatures forming and dissolving in mere moments, planets orbiting strange, multi-hued suns, and endless dark voids that stirred a profound sense of awe and solitude within him. The sounds here were louder and more chaotic, a cacophony of screams, laughter, and clashing metallic noises, as if an entire universe was simultaneously collapsing and being reborn. Ethan struggled to maintain his composure, to remember the symbol the old man had pointed out, to cling to the image of his village in his mind. But the temporal currents were incredibly strong, threatening to rip apart his consciousness and scatter it across this infinite expanse. In one moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity and yet vanish in an instant, Ethan felt the movement begin to slow, as if the storm was finally abating. The colors and shapes started to take on more stable forms. He saw before him a long tunnel, but it was no longer the luminous passage of before, rather a dark and twisting one, illuminated intermittently by sparks of the faint blue light he had come to recognize. Ethan felt a force propelling him forward within this shadowy tunnel. He did not know where he was headed, but he trusted the old man's words and the burning desire within him to return to his home. He began to walk with hesitant steps, feeling his way through the darkness, listening to the faint echoes that reverberated through the tunnel's confines. As he walked, strange carvings began to appear on the tunnel walls, not the familiar runes he had seen earlier, but intricate geometric patterns and incomprehensible symbols, as if a language of a long-vanished race. Some of these carvings glowed faintly, casting an eerie light just sufficient to illuminate the path ahead. Ethan felt that this tunnel held profound secrets, tales of worlds and civilizations that might no longer exist. Roughly halfway through the tunnel, Ethan reached a fork in the path. Another passage branched off from the main tunnel, descending downwards into complete darkness. He hesitated for a moment, unsure which way to proceed, but suddenly he heard a faint voice calling his name from within the dark passage. The voice resembled the whispering wind he had heard near the blue light in the snowy wilderness. Ethan did not hesitate for long. An unseen force seemed to draw him towards this familiar sound, as if it held a promise of return. He turned into the darker passage and began to descend cautiously, leaning on his walking stick. The darkness here was absolute, and he could no longer see anything ahead. But he continued to walk, trusting that this path would lead him to his destination. After what felt like a long descent, a faint light began to appear at the end of the passage. The light grew gradually brighter, revealing a vast underground chamber. The chamber was lit by fires burning in ancient stone hearths, and the walls were covered in carvings and drawings similar to those he had seen in the chamber of the ancient figures. However, these drawings were more detailed, depicting scenes of battles between creatures both human and animal, and complex astronomical symbols. In the center of the chamber, Ethan saw a group of people sitting around one of the hearths. They wore simple leather garments and carried primitive weapons. Their features were rugged, and their gazes were wary. Ethan felt as if he had traveled to a distant time in the past, to an era about which he knew nothing. As Ethan approached, these people looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They did not speak to him, but their stares conveyed their astonishment at his sudden appearance. Ethan felt like an outsider in this place too, an intruder in their world. Suddenly, the chamber shook violently and rocks began to fall from the ceiling. One of the people shouted in their strange language, and everyone began to move quickly. Ethan understood that some danger threatened this place. He had no time to inquire or understand what was happening. He felt another force pulling him, and the faint blue light began to reappear around him. He knew his journey was continuing, and that he would have to traverse more worlds and times before he could potentially return to his village. But this time, he felt a stronger sense of hope and a belief that his destination was drawing closer. As the chamber shook and rocks rained down from the ceiling, Ethan felt a strange force pulling him backward, as if another gravity, distinct from that of Earth, had taken hold. The anxious faces of the cave dwellers vanished, and the flickering firelight dissolved, replaced by a stark darkness for a few fleeting seconds. Then, a new light erupted, but it was unlike the familiar blue glow. This light was a deep, crimson red, staining everything around him with a bloody hue. Ethan found himself standing in an open space, but it was neither a snowy wilderness, nor a dense forest, nor a sandy shore. He stood on cracked, barren earth that stretched before him to a distant horizon where jagged black mountains loomed under a fiery red sky. The air was hot and dry, carrying the acrid scent of sulfur and smoke. An absolute silence prevailed, broken only by the occasional rustling sound from afar, like the breathing of some colossal creature. Ethan gazed around in bewilderment. He saw no signs of life, no vegetation, no animals, only this desolate land and the scarlet sky. He felt a profound sense of loneliness, as if he were the last human being alive in this dead world. Fear, different from the fear of the unknown, began to creep into his heart, the fear of annihilation and nothingness. Suddenly, the rustling sound he had heard in the distance grew closer. It was accompanied by the heavy thud of footsteps that shook the ground. Emerging from behind one of the hills was a colossal creature unlike any Ethan had ever seen. It resembled a dragon, but its scales were a gleaming black, its wings vast and leathery, and its glowing red eyes spewed forth smoke. The creature moved slowly, as if surveying its surroundings, then stopped abruptly when it saw Ethan. Ethan felt paralyzed with fear. He could not move or speak. He stood frozen, watching as this mythical beast approached him. The creature's hot breath washed over his face, and the stench of sulfur intensified. Ethan closed his eyes, resigning himself to whatever was about to happen. But to his astonishment, the creature did nothing. After a few moments, Ethan felt the creature's hot breath move away, and then he heard the heavy thud of its footsteps fading into the distance. He cautiously opened his eyes and saw the creature retreating, disappearing behind the black hills. Ethan exhaled a deep sigh of relief, feeling as if his soul had returned to his body. He did not understand why this terrifying beast had spared him, but he was grateful for his survival. He decided that this world was not safe, and that he needed to find a way out as quickly as possible. Ethan began to walk in a different direction, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the place where the creature had appeared. He walked for what felt like endless hours under the crimson sky, the barren land stretching out in every direction. He began to feel parched, hungry, and utterly exhausted, but he continued to walk, driven by his instinct for survival. Finally, in the distance, he saw something different on the horizon. A small patch of pale blue color stood out against the red sky. As he drew closer, it became clear that it was not a part of the sky, but rather a small vortex of light, remarkably similar to the gateway he had stepped through initially. Hope surged through Ethan's heart. Perhaps this was the way back, but something lingered in his mind. This dead red world felt familiar, echoing a long-buried feeling deep within his memory. Then, it struck him. He remembered the horror stories he had heard as a child about the faint light in the mountains, about the curse that had befallen his village due to their abandonment of the wrecked ship. He remembered the legendary fear of that light, and the belief that it was a gateway to underworlds. He looked at the fiery red sky and the barren earth, and felt a strange connection to this terrifying place. He began to understand that this world was not just another realm, but a manifestation of the ancient fear that gripped the hearts of his villagers, a fear of guilt and punishment, a fear of the unknown lurking behind that luminous secret. This world was the true heart of darkness, not merely a place, but a state of consciousness, the embodiment of the terror that resided within them. But witnessing this fear personified before him did not instill terror. Instead, it ignited a sense of strength within him. He had faced the monstrous creature and survived, and he had walked through this dead land and not succumbed. He realized that fear was not a tangible thing, but an illusion, a force that could be overcome with courage and faith. He looked at the pale blue vortex and decided that he would not run from this fear. Instead, he would face it head-on. He began to walk confidently towards the vortex, his eyes fixed upon it. He knew that the path home might still be fraught with peril, but he was prepared to face anything. He had learned much on his journey, and most importantly, he had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to triumph over it. As Ethan reached the pale blue vortex, he felt none of the hesitation he had experienced when first entering the luminous secret. He gazed inwards with a newfound confidence, as if he now understood that these gateways were not random passages, but rather responses to his inner self, reflections of his spiritual state and deepest desires. He had faced a manifestation of his village's ancient fear and emerged from it stronger and more resolute. When Ethan stepped into the azure vortex, he did not feel the tearing and disorientation of his initial passage. This crossing was smoother, akin to gliding through a gentle current. The deep crimson hues of the dead world gradually faded, replaced by a vast spectrum of vibrant colors he had never witnessed before. Colors danced and intertwined, forming surreal artistic tapestries that his mind could not fully grasp, yet they evoked within him a sense of joy and optimism. Ethan felt as though he was returning to a familiar path, as if these blue hues were guiding markers leading him towards his destination. Other scenes began to materialize before him, but they were different from the bizarre worlds he had visited previously. He caught glimpses of the past, perhaps of his village's history, or the history of the ancient civilizations that once inhabited the Alpine regions. He saw peasants working in fields under a warm sun, craftsmen diligently building stone structures, and figures in ceremonial robes performing arcane rituals under the moonlight. These scenes were swift and fleeting, yet they left strong impressions on his mind, like fragments of a lost collective memory. Interspersed with these glimpses of the past, other visions began to appear, perhaps from the future. He saw vehicles moving through the air without wings, small devices through which people spoke and saw each other across distances, and vast cities constructed from gleaming materials he could not identify. These visions were awe-inspiring, yet they felt distant and intangible, like mere possibilities of what might be. Amidst this flow of images and colors, Ethan began to hear a faint sound, a sound so familiar this time that it almost brought him to tears. It was the sound of his mother calling his name, her tone laced with the anxious love he had missed so dearly. The words were not clear, but he could discern the inflection in her voice, and that was enough to fill his heart with longing and renewed hope. This call acted as a beacon, illuminating his way through this cosmic darkness. He began to focus all his energy on this sound, trying to draw closer to it, to follow it through these turbulent temporal currents. He felt the gateway begin to respond to his desire, guiding him now more directly towards the source of this familiar call. The scenes gradually faded away, replaced by a soft, white mist. Ethan felt something envelop him gently, like a warm embrace after a long absence. He began to feel the weight of his body again, and the cool mountain air filling his lungs. The white mist slowly dissipated, revealing a sight that was intimately familiar to Ethan. He stood on the crest of a snow-covered ridge, looking down at the village of Edelweiss. But something was different. The village appeared smaller, as if the number of houses had dwindled. There were new buildings he did not recognize, and the architectural style of the houses seemed different. He could not precisely determine the time to which he had returned, but he was certain it was not the same era he had left. The sunlight was bright, and the sky was a clear blue. There was no trace of the mysterious blue light that had guided him on his journey. But as Ethan looked down, he saw a group of people gathered near the old course of the Rhone River. Something gleamed in the sunlight amongst them. Ethan began to descend the ridge quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, it became clear that the gleaming object was the wreckage of an old ship, partially buried in the snow. There were remnants of a massive wooden hull, broken planks, and tattered pieces of cloth. Ethan approached the gathered villagers, who were looking at the wreckage with a mixture of curiosity and sorrow. He asked them if they knew anything about this ship. An elderly man with a weathered face replied, "This is an old tale, young man, a story told by our ancestors of a ship that was lost in a great storm long ago. It is said that the villagers did not offer aid, their hearts set on the treasures it might hold, and a curse has lingered upon our village since that day. But that was a long time ago, and many of the details have been lost to memory." Ethan looked at the wreckage, then at the changed village before him. He realized that he had indeed returned to his home, but to a different time, perhaps decades or even centuries after he had departed. His journey through the Azure Gateway had been a journey through time as well. A deep sadness washed over Ethan. He had returned, but he found his world transformed. Where were his family and friends? Where was the life he had known? But at the same time, he felt a sense of triumph. He had faced his fear, traveled through countless worlds and times, and finally returned to a place he knew. This was the beginning of a new journey, a journey to explore this new era in which he found himself, and to understand his destiny in this altered world. Ethan stood on the snowy ridge, gazing at the village that had once been his home. The transformation was evident in everything, from the architecture of the houses to the faces of the people. There were familiar landmarks that tugged at his memory: the location of the old village square, the shape of certain distant peaks. But the overall atmosphere was different, more modern in some aspects and simpler in others. He descended into the village with hesitant steps, feeling like a stranger in his own land. The villagers looked at him with curiosity, his unfamiliar clothes and the weariness of a long journey setting him apart. He tried to speak with them, but his dialect sounded old and strange to some, while others understood him with difficulty. Eventually, Ethan found refuge in the shade of an ancient oak tree that had stood since his childhood. He sat there, observing the movement of the people and listening to their conversations, trying to piece together the threads of this new era. He learned from their speech that the village was still called Edelweiss, and that they knew the tale of a cursed shipwreck as an ancient legend, but its details had become faded and distorted through generations. Ethan recognized some old family names mentioned by the elderly man, names of families that had lived in the village in his time, but he saw none of the faces he remembered. He inquired about his own family, about his father and mother, but the villagers looked at him with sympathy, saying those names were very old and no one recalled them. A deep sadness washed over Ethan. His world was lost, and he had returned to a place he knew yet no longer belonged to. He felt more alone than ever, even amidst these people who might have been the descendants of his neighbors and friends. But Ethan was not one to despair. The spirit of adventure and exploration still burned within him. He decided to start anew, to learn about this new time, and to try to find his place within it. He began to wander through the village, talking with people, asking about their customs and traditions, about their history and the changes that had occurred. Ethan met a young woman named Alara, who possessed a sharp intellect and a curiosity akin to his own. Alara was interested in old tales and legends, and she listened intently to Ethan's strange stories of the light in the mountains and his journey through other worlds. She wasn't entirely certain she believed every word he said, but she was fascinated by his unusual character and his compelling tales. Alara offered Ethan shelter in her home and a chance to understand this new age. Ethan accepted her offer with gratitude and felt a flicker of hope rekindle in his heart. Perhaps he was not entirely alone in this new world. Ethan began to learn about village life in this time. There were new tools and technologies he had never seen before, and the way people interacted with each other seemed different. But there were also things that remained unchanged, such as the simplicity of agricultural life, the strength of family bonds, and a deep-rooted faith in old customs and traditions. One night, as Ethan sat with Alara by the light of a lantern, he asked her about Mont Blanc and the legends surrounding it. Alara replied that the mountain still stood as a symbol of power and majesty, and that there were many tales woven around it, including stories of hidden passages leading to other realms. Ethan listened intently, feeling an invisible connection binding him to this place and this time. Perhaps his journey had not been a mere accident, and perhaps there was a reason for his arrival in this particular era. Maybe he had a role to play in this new world. Ethan noticed that the fear that had gripped his village in the past had faded with the passage of time. The villagers no longer spoke of the light in the mountains with the same terror, and the story of the cursed ship had become just an old tale told to children. Ethan realized that fear could change and dissipate over time, and that true courage lay in facing the unknown and moving forward. Ethan decided to settle in this new village, to build a new life for himself. He carried within him the memories of other worlds and different times, but he was determined to live in this new reality and to use the experiences he had gained to become a better person and to help the people of this village build a brighter future. His journey through time might have ended, but his true adventure was just beginning. Years passed, and Ethan lived in the new Edelweiss. He was no longer the outsider looked upon with curiosity and suspicion, but had become an integral part of the community. He mastered their newer dialect and customs, and worked diligently in their fields and workshops, his past carpentry skills proving invaluable in unexpected ways. He remained a close friend to Alara, who continued to listen with rapt attention to his tales of other worlds and times, even if she considered them to be the vivid imaginings of a man who had undergone a strange experience. Ethan rarely spoke of the full details of his journey to others, fearing they would dismiss him as mad or a liar. Yet, he carried within him a treasure trove of knowledge and experiences, a deeper understanding of the nature of time, fear, and courage. Every morning, he would watch the sun rise over Mont Blanc, remembering that night he had set off towards the light, and how that journey had led him to this place and this time. As time went on, Ethan observed that some of the old legends he knew from his own time still persisted in the memory of the new villagers, albeit altered and embellished through the generations. The tale of the cursed shipwreck had evolved into a fantastical story of vengeful spirits and hidden treasures. The faint light that had once flickered in the mountains had become a distant memory, no longer inspiring the same fear that it had in his old village. Ethan came to understand that fear diminished when confronted, and that legends morphed and adapted with the passage of time. True courage, he realized, lay in continuing to live and adapting to change, no matter how profound. He never forgot his family and friends from his original time, but he learned to accept the reality that a return to them was impossible. He found a new family in the people of this future Edelweiss, dedicating his life to helping them and contributing to their community. He imparted his wisdom and experience subtly through his work and his daily interactions. One day, while helping to repair an old stone wall, Ethan discovered a peculiar inscription on a weathered stone. It was a circle with an eye in its center, the same symbol the mysterious old man had shown him in the chamber between worlds. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine, and he understood that his journey had not been a mere dream, and that unseen forces had been guiding and protecting him. Ethan kept this discovery to himself, treasuring the symbol as a reminder of his extraordinary voyage. He understood that life was full of secrets and mysteries, and that there was always more to discover and explore. Ethan lived a long and fulfilling life in the new village, witnessing many changes over the years. He saw the generation he had arrived in grow old, and watched new generations flourish. He became a respected elder, sought out for his wisdom and guidance. He would often share stories of the distant past and fantastical adventures in other realms, but he always emphasized the importance of courage, faith, and hope in the face of life's challenges. In his final years, as he lay on his bed surrounded by his descendants, Ethan gazed out of his window and saw the shadow of Mont Blanc stretching over the village, just as it always had. A sense of peace and contentment washed over him. He had traveled a long and arduous path, from fear to courage, from a familiar world to an unknown one, and had returned to find his place in a different time. His life was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and its ability to adapt and overcome any adversity. Ethan remembered the faint light that had started it all, and realized it had not been a malevolent ghost or a curse, but an invitation to adventure, an opportunity to confront fear and discover himself. That light had left a lasting legacy on his life, a message of courage, of venturing into the unknown, and of returning with the wisdom of transience. And as he finally breathed his last, a faint smile touched his lips, the smile of a man who had lived a life filled with wonder and had ultimately triumphed over his own heart of darkness. And here the story ends. Follow more stories on the Eastern Nights channel. If you like the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to receive all new updates, and let us know your opinion in the comments.